Good day, and welcome to this month's episode of Diversity Speaks, True Talk with Terri. I'm Terri Howard, Associate Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Herzing University. At Herzing, we believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion are a living, breathing part of who we are and what we do. We've created this series in part because we wanted to create a forum for civil discourse. We won't always agree, but let's speak our truths in a way where we can listen, learn, and as a result, grow. Also, there's a lot of questions out there around topics related to DEI. We hope to shed some light on some of these topics and leave you with something to think about. True Talk is about really taking the time to really understand everyone. So let's get talking and speak our truths. Today's topic is cultural competence. Now, last year, we did an episode on cultural competence in healthcare specifically. We received such an overwhelming response from our audience members asking us for more general information around the topic that we decided to present this topic from a perspective of increasing effective communication and engagement with others. I once had an opportunity to travel to Yellowknife. It's a city in the Northwest Territories of Canada. The purpose of this visit was to train a group of teachers who teach Inuit students. And upon getting the assignment, I thought to myself, now how are these teachers going to relate to a young Black woman from the Midwest? Well, I purchased my triple fat parka and I was on my way, only to get there and be in 50-degree weather. Because the teachers spoke their native language of Inuktitut, I had a translator. During the first hour of the training, all was seemingly going well, except for one thing. No one was looking at me. At the break, I asked the translator how things were going. She responded, "Everyone is really loving this training." "Really?" I said. "I wasn't sure because no one's looking at me." "That's right," the translator said. "It is culturally normal for Inuit people not to look at someone who they view as the authority figure. It's really a sign of respect." Although this was my first lesson in cultural competence, over the next several weeks, I would learn several other lessons, which would have me much more aware and appreciative and respectful of others. This is my truth and the basis of what we will be discussing today. There is no one definition of cultural competence. In fact, definitions of cultural competence have evolved from diverse perspectives, interests, and needs, and are incorporated now in state legislation, federal statutes, programs, private sector organizations, and even academic settings. The seminal work of Cross in 1989 offered a definition of cultural competence that established a solid foundation for the field. The definition has been widely adapted and modified during the past 15 years, but the core concepts and principles espoused in this framework remain constant, and they are viewed as universally applicable across multiple systems. Cultural competence, then, is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system, agency, or among professionals and enable that system, agency, or those professions to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. The word culture is used because it implies the integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and even institutions. The word competence is used because, well, it implies having the capacity to function effectively. There are 5 essential elements that contribute to a system's or an institution's ability to become more culturally competent. They are valuing diversity, having the capacity for cultural self assessment, being conscious of the dynamics inherent when cultures interact, having institutionalized cultural knowledge, and having developed adaptations to service delivery reflecting an understanding of cultural diversity. Now, these five elements should be manifested at every level of an organization, including policymaking to administrative and practice. Further, these elements should be reflected in the attitudes, structures, policies, and services of an organization. Our guest today has added value to our discussion. Heather Gilvary Hamid is a senior student services advisor for Herzing University and supports students at various levels of their journey, whether navigating returning to school after many years or dealing with personal barriers to success. Heather meets students where they are and helps them figure out how to get through their educational journey. Welcome, Heather, to today's show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, we've been talking about cultural competence and the importance of being competent to be able to engage with other people. So, can you talk about cultural competence from a perspective of working with students?
Oh, certainly. So at first, I would say there is some backlash with cultural competency conversations, and my response to that would be that it just starts with being polite. And I want to be polite with my students. I want to meet them where they are and make sure that I'm respecting who they are, their background, and how they came to their position that they're in right now. So I think that's the first component is just respect and politeness. Something that you learn back in your own home. Hopefully, that you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. Understanding that that might look different in different scenarios, but always taking in mind that people want to be treated with kindness and respect, and it starts with cultural competency, with just understanding what would be received well and what would be considered rude.
I like that. And a couple of interesting points that you made. Not only did you talk about being polite and respectful, but I think in terms of your example, is getting to know students. Because if you meet them where they are, that takes getting to know someone. So maybe there's conversations with students that doesn't have anything to do with necessarily why you're interacting, but will give you the information that you need to be able to engage in a way that's effective, not only for you, but for the student as well.
Absolutely. Often I work with students that are in academic distress. They've either been dismissed or they're at risk of being dismissed from the university. And very often those students are struggling with some personal issue as well, or personal or family issue. It might even be something like one of the things I've learned since coming to Herzing is the impact of hurricanes. That's not something I understood or grew up with. Growing up in Indiana, I was familiar with tornadoes, but I never had an appreciation for what a hurricane can do to a community, a household, and to a student who's trying to focus on their studies. So it's really saying, what obstacles or hurdles might a student be facing? How might they face those obstacles as a community? Because we don't usually face them all alone, even though we sometimes feel that way. We're not alone. We carry all of our ancestors and our background and our teachers and mentors with us in any struggle. And so they impact our culture. And by being culturally competent, I'm more effective in helping them through whatever issue they're facing.
I really like that. And obviously, at Herzing, we have a diverse group of students. And so, can you talk a little bit, Heather, about your own journey in terms of becoming culturally competent? Right. So, it's not only engaging with the students, but it's a diversity of students, right? So, part of that is our own journey to better understand and assess ourselves. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Certainly. So, ever since I was a little child, I've always been interested in how other cultures operate, how they manage. And one of my favorite children's books actually dealt with someone going from one culture into another and how they had to learn all these new skills and ideas of how to do simple things like eat and play with other children. So, it's just always been a curiosity to me. Um, in college, in my undergraduate program, I studied international business and Spanish, primarily because I was interested in Spanish, but knew I didn't have enough Spanish ability to teach it. So I coupled that with business and started off in working in an export department of a company, a manufacturing company. And so worked with customers all around the world. And then I moved into higher ed and worked in at different universities, public, private. But my idea of cultural competency always dealt with how do I interact with students from another country. It wasn't till I came to Herzing that I realized there was a whole new diversity that I was just ignoring or neglecting, and that was the beautiful diversity we have here in the United States. Like I said earlier, just learning about different regions and what issues and what cultural delights we might find in different regions of the country, different ethnic, racial backgrounds. I would say that even though I worked with international students from dozens, hundreds of countries, I've never worked in such a diverse place as Herzing, where I'm interacting with coworkers and students who are more diverse than any place I've ever been in before. So that's been interesting. And then the other little story I like to tell, now, Dr. Howard, you can look at me as part of my journey and you'd see, well, Heather has something on her head that kind of indicates a little bit about her own diversity. And I didn't grow up with this, so this was a change for me. And then after I put on the scarf, I found out I needed hearing aids. So I wear one of my points of diversity literally covers up another. And but that makes me who I am, and it makes me more empathetic and more understanding of people that have different abilities. And so I think that it has been a journey as I have changed in my own life and met and encountered new cultures. I've had to grow in my understanding, and I'm daily being challenged in my job and in my personal life to be more competent.
That's wonderful. And it's obvious that you not only have done the work, but are currently doing the work, like many of us, to become more culturally competent. I will also just reflect on being fairly new to Herzing and sending out some messaging and getting from you an email about being more inclusive in terms of adding other religions and faiths into the message. And certainly that was something that made me not only learn a lesson that I needed to learn, but that has stuck with me in terms of making sure that messages are inclusive. So I think we're doing the work, and that's important to call it out when we see it that work can be done. But are there any other I don't know, lessons that you would pass on to others who are in the middle of their own journeys around cultural competency?
Well, that kind of ties in with what you just said, and I do appreciate your openness and willingness. Having a cultural competency dialogue as an ongoing thing where people are open to say, oh, I hadn't thought of this, or I hadn't realized that, or this is new to me. Can you explain more? These are, and you're willing to do that, as you mentioned in our conversation. That would be one piece of advice, is to recognize that most people come at cultural competency with an interest in doing the right thing and just trusting that people want to be the polite people that they are, and just sometimes they um, are trying to navigate their way through that. Another thing, I like the story that you told about your experience, and it reminded me of a little thing exercise we did sometimes in elementary school, which we called KWLs. There, where you look at what you know about a situation, a topic, What do you wonder about and what did you learn? So sometimes you talked about going in with the Inuit culture and you said, I'm going to be cold, so I better put on a jacket. I better get a warm jacket.
Sure.
And then you wondered about the eye contact that you didn't see happening and you were concerned about that. And then finally you step back and say, what did I learn? Well, I learned that that is a measure of respect within this culture. So I think when I'm going into a situation where I say, oh, this is new to me, I start off, well, what do I know? What do I wonder about? And then I go back and finish that off by saying, what did I learn? Because that's where the real sweetness comes in. So I just think, being willing to say I'm learning and I come at this with a desire to be polite and respectful of other people, being patient with yourself, and then just that simple elementary exercise I experienced in elementary school of know, wonder, and learn. So that would be my advice.
I think all of us could benefit from a little bit of KWLs in our life. Thank you so much, Heather, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I thank you for reaching out and look forward as we both continue and grow in this conversation.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
Developing cultural competence is a process rather than an endpoint. Just like any skill, the process of development and improvement continues. And it's hard to point to a particular time when you can say, that's it, I've reached it. There are many ways by which we can increase our capacity to be effective in our interactions with others. Try active listening, increasing your knowledge, doing a self assessment, and going beyond tolerance. Tolerating different cultural backgrounds is a step in the right direction. However, tolerance is not always optimal. In fact, tolerance usually means that you're simply putting up with someone that is undesirable. Cultural competence goes beyond putting up with differences and instead involves being appreciative, affirming, and inclusive of all cultural backgrounds. That's our truth, and that's our show. Join us next time for True Talk.